Hi Justin, and let's break down your animation. So first of all, I really like the design of the explosion, especially in the first half. The motion is also quite nice. The spacing is good. So let's focus on your question and the overall design. So in terms of the question, so how do you make something like this? First off, in this case the explosion kind of have two stages, two different parts. So you have initial burst and you have a secondary burst, and you can have any number of bursts if you want, any number of additional explosions. So it all kind of breaks down into stages. So we have an initial explosion which starts quite pointy, then becomes bigger in volume, more rounded, then becomes more rounded, slows down, and becomes starts swirling and billowing and slowing down even more, which you can already notice. So you can see that it slows down and slows down even more. So what happens after that is that we have another mass at the bottom, and it starts increasing in size, but at first it's not a big change. So it starts rotating and it starts getting bigger, but it's not very noticeable, while the top part still decelerates, billows down on its own, swirls, and all that stuff. And then you can see that we start the acceleration at the bottom. First, it doesn't affect the top part much. The motion kinda is the same. There's no reaction. And then you can see that we've got an acceleration, even bigger acceleration at the bottom. The form starts expanding while also crashing on its own, crashing inside, rotating and expanding. And essentially you're just animating an explosion here at the bottom, and it starts affecting the top part. So it's big enough to affect the motion at the top. So this scene is still relatively unaffected, while this mass has started moving and accelerating. And then you can see that it starts affecting every other part. And then it covers this and explodes at the top. So essentially, we have an initial explosion with deceleration and all that stuff that we usually do. Then we start building up an anticipation for the explosion at the bottom. Then we have the explosion at the bottom, and then after a few frames we get a reaction on the nearby masses, and then it starts affecting other masses, and if it's big enough it can affect the entire explosion. So that's the overall principle. So for example, we can have an explosion, animate something quite fast. Let's keep it very rough. Okay. And let's add another frame for the slowdown. So now we want to add a secondary explosion. We'd have to build up an explosion somewhere, pick a place and the direction, and then I'll start by having the same slowdown first. Okay. And now we'll add a secondary explosion from here. So we start by increasing and pushing this mass here, adding more mass, and slowly changing the stuff around it. and we can make the change faster or more gradual. Here it's a bit more gradual at the beginning, but we can also start a very fast change if we want. So we start affecting nearby masses. While this part is still unaffected. And then let's do a rapid change. And it starts affecting these masses too. And then let's add some follow-up motion to deliver that energy. So that's essentially it. So we have the initial blast, we have a slowdown, trying to make masses interesting, trying not to make everything too repetitive, adding some variety in motion, which I totally didn't do because it was a quick sketch. And then you start building up. You can build up the change slowly, or you can actually build up the change very fast. You can change the shape in one frame, or you can sort of do a slow build up. You can do this, you can add an anticipation, so for example you can actually shrink a bit. Having other ways of reaction also helps, like if it's an animated shot, having a shockwave, having debris is super helpful. And it's very nice to have contrast, so it's better to have like fast versus slow, so the change in the form is very fast, so it is always nice to have a clear slowdown after that, so that the viewer can understand what's actually happening in the shot. Another nice thing is sparks or something like that. It can also help to sell this effect of very fast change. And essentially that's the way you can do it. So in terms of the explosions themselves and timing, spacing and all that stuff, as I said, it's quite good. One thing we can work on for sure is some of the repetitiveness in the design, repetition in shapes. So I like this, and I mostly like that. It's just that when you construct your explosions, you tend to do it like a tower of blocks or circles that is very predictable in terms of the size, progression, and the angle and direction. So if you look here, for example, we have not this one, but rather this one. Not all masses line up some masses may go in a different way. They may bulk, they may intersect, overlap. Whereas if you look here, in the overall sketch, in the construction, everything is more or less lined up. So there are very few additional shapes to break up the silhouette and to break up the direction. So we can do this, and you can see that the overall size progression of the gaps is also very repetitive. But we can do something like make the differences more noticeable, and you can combine shapes. So instead of using just a circle, it can be something like that. Maybe we can add a rotated circle here that can enter the shape but can also be sort of outside the shape, and we can add something here. So it's just about breaking up this progression and trying not to make everything on the same line, on the same angle, with similar space. And it's also nice to break up the progression. So if you have something like this, it's better to break it up and do something like that. So not in line and not from biggest to the smallest, just because it makes it very predictable and repetitive. We can mix up small shapes and bigger shapes and all that stuff. And you can actually do that, and you're doing this here and here. It looks nice. It's just about keeping that in mind when you're shading and adding additional shapes. You want to have that clarity and interesting forms in your design, keeping the silhouette interesting, keeping the shapes interesting and varied. Also, if you want to support the feeling that an explosion is heading towards the camera or something is moving towards the camera, you can shade it slightly differently to emphasize the volume better. And for example, like this, it's not very clear if it's going away from us, if it's just flat. So adding shadow like this can really sell the form. You can also increase the contrast between shadows and the smoke quite a bit, so it can actually be way more dramatic. The shadows can be way deeper, I guess around even like this. And don't forget about shadows and forms. If the other form is weak enough, it will give a bigger shadow on the overall form. So again, everything is quite good. It's just about tuning it up, making it even better, finding the way for you to make it work in your style and the way you want it, and everything will be great. So good luck with your animations, and see you later.